Gentlemen, there was a time when people looked at me and thought they knew the whole story. I was articulate, ambitious, purposeful, or so they thought. To many, including medical specialists, it meant that I'd chosen career over children. What no one saw were the private ruins, the ache that arrived like clockwork. My path to becoming a mother was winding, invisible, excruciating. Had I known how profoundly motherhood would transform me, I might have been paralysed by how far I still had to travel. But tonight, ladies and gentlemen, it's not about my story. It's about theirs. The daughter who avoids baby showers, the sister who cannot be around other people's children, the aunt who dotes on everyone else's children but never became a mother herself, the partner who carries silent sorrow in their bones. It's about the stories rarely told, the ones that live in unopened hospital corridors and nurseries that have no life. And it's about maybe next times whispered in the dark. Fertility isn't linear, it's a labyrinth. And in that tangle of yearning, longing, and fragile hope, there's AJFN. When the unthinkable happens, a failed IVF round, a miscarriage, a stillbirth, we're left with fragments. And somehow we still have to name them, not for others, but for ourselves, because language is how we metabolise pain. How we stay human even when our hearts are breaking in ways that defy explanation. So tonight, we find the words. Some will be spoken softly, some may tremble, but all of them will matter. Because these aren't just stories of loss, they're stories of love, of longing, of rebuilding life after rupture. Ultimately, they're stories of radical hope. Our incredible panellists aren't here to perform resilience. They're here to share their stories in all their messy, breathtaking humanity. AJFN doesn't just welcome honesty, it sanctifies it. So tonight we do more than listen. We hold space, we bear witness, and together we find the words. Our first panellist, her story resists easy telling. Rebekah is a force in law, in public life, and in the terrain of survival. Before the accolades, she lived through a descent that few of us could fathom. Rebekah survived the Boxing Day tsunami, a cataclysm that didn't just take things, it very nearly took everything. She endured 140 surgeries, etched not only on her body but carved deep into her psyche. And then she faced another battle, a fertility journey marked by trauma and grit. But her story doesn't end there, it deepens. In an unexpected turn, Rebekah discovers that she's Jewish, a sacred inheritance. Today, Rebekah is the mother of 3, and that's still just part of her story. She's living proof that devastation doesn't get the final word. Resilience does. That wreckage can become wisdom, that life against all the odds can still be chosen. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please welcome the magnificent Rebekah Giles. Our next guests carry a story so tender, so heroic, that it will leave a permanent imprint on your soul. Before their daughter, Stevie Dillon, entered the world and left it far too soon, Gabbi Mitchell was already walking a long road. When she and Ari finally conceived and carried to full term, it felt as though the long winter had ended. At 37 and a half weeks pregnant, radiant, hopeful, and ready. Gabbi stood at AJN's Infertility Awareness Shabbat. She spoke her truth and she offered courage to others. 2 weeks later, Stevie Dillon was born still. What followed was more than an avalanche of grief. It was the unmaking of a world that had just begun. AJFN stood with them, not with platitudes, but with presence. And from the start, AJFN had paired Gabbi with Lee, a gentle guide who generously revealed that she too had lost a child to stillbirth. Support became sanctuary, a bond stitched not by circumstance, but by profound knowing. In Stevie's honour, Ari swam 140 kilometres so others would never walk that road alone. Grief became movement, movement became mitzvah. Today, Gabbi and Ari are the besotted parents of Remy and the guardians of Stevie's legacy. Their story now lives in 2 rhythms, one held in arms, the other in memory. Please welcome 2 people whose love and loss have redefined family. The magnificent Gabbi and Ari Mitchell. Rebekah, your life didn't unfold, it erupted. It's the morning of December 26, 2004. You're 27 years old, a young woman on holidays, and then the tsunami hits. Can you take us back to that moment and the devastation that follows?
I almost can't. It's such a surreal memory to this day, 20 years later. It was, in many ways, a sort of turning point in my life. It was I was living my life with blinkers on, an ambitious young lawyer, not a care in the world, and then suddenly everything changed. You would never expect in a million years to be hit by a wave of water when you're on holidays. But that's what happened, and it started the beginning of a very, very long and slow journey to recovery.
Presumably at that point in your life, you weren't thinking about babies or biology.
No, not at all.
And yet in the middle of life-saving surgeries, doctors already are talking to you about preserving your fertility amidst these horrific injuries. How do you even get your head around that at such a tender age while you're clinging to life?
Yeah, I don't even think I gave informed consent, but I'm glad that it happened because, people were looking out for me when I could not even look out for myself or think of these things. And I was just so fortunate to be medevaced back to Australia, where the medical care is just out of this world, and they were thinking of these things. So when ultimately I did want to look at having children, that was an option for me.
You are now a proud ambassador for the Fertility and Research Clinic at the Royal Hospital for Women Foundation. You've said something that's so profound to me that few dare to voice. Fertility is not just about an individual or a couple wanting to have a family. It's not just people trying to have children. It impacts young trauma survivors, cancer patients, even toddlers. What does it mean to advocate for futures that haven't even yet begun?
Oh, I think it's such an important role. And I think that if you've ever been the recipient of this incredible science, you know how the options it can give to people, to 2-year-old girls who are about to start chemotherapy, who are not even thinking about what lies 20 years ahead, 30 years ahead. I think that, particularly when we're talking about communities like the Jewish community where there's so many genetic issues and things like that, it's that sort of research and development and procedures that can literally change generations and change lives. So for me, it is one of the most important things I've done since I've recovered from my injuries, because It's something that I feel it truly changed my life, in the sense that when I sort of, after I got over my initial injuries and I was having a lot of surgery in my pelvis area and other parts, you know, the doctors just said, look, we just have to be straight with you. It's very unlikely that you'll be able to conceive and bear a child. And I have to say that I actually thought, you know, fair enough. I have survived this crazy event where hundreds of thousands of people died. So if that was the price that I was going to have to pay, fair enough. And I was content with that. And then I got a bit greedy, because life went on, and then I had that feeling, and I wanted to have a family, and the natural feeling and urge to create my own family. And I was able to go back to the doctors that looked after me from day one to talk to them about what I could do. And after a long journey, ultimately, I was able to have my first child.
Rebekah, you're told that motherhood may never come, and yet, thank God it does. 3 children, a rebuilt life. Now that you've had that distance, what do you think tethered you to hope when everything else felt like it was falling apart?
Other people, truthfully. When something so crazy happens to you, and it's happening to you, and I was so ill, and I was in a coma for a long time, and I wasn't really with it. It was literally the other people in my life, a community of people that rallied around me. Doctors, family, friends, strangers. And I actually just felt obligated to turn up to the next surgery and the next one, and then to physio and to all of the things. And that's why what I love about this organisation, it's community, and it's not just about money, it's about so much more. It's that support, and it's the spiritual guidance, and all the things and all the ingredients that make up that experience. I think it's incredibly special.
I'm very lucky in my life. I'm an investigative journalist some of the time. I do other things as well. But I've had a podcast for many years, and I get to speak to pretty remarkable people. This is one of my favourite stories. I do know the answer to this, but it has to be shared with you. So, Rebekah, you discover later in life that you're Jewish.
Yeah.
How does that revelation come to be?
There were lots of signs, but to be honest, it was I mean, I was adopted as a baby, and I was adopted to a Christian family, and I grew up in the hills of Sydney. And I went to university. I'd actually never even met a Jew in my whole life. And then I went to university, and I met a couple of Jewish students, and then I met one, and I ended up marrying her brother. It obviously all started with the food. They invited me to Friday night, and then I was like, the food. I was so interested, and I was so attracted to these people. And I married a Jewish guy, and I started an Orthodox conversion because I just really wanted to be properly Jewish. So that took me 6 years because my Hebrew is that bad. And I messed up pretty much everything, but it took me a very, very long time, and there was a few signs along the way. We did a DNA test, and it came. I was like, it's got to be a mistake. I just ignored it, and look at me. I don't look very Jewish, right? So I ended up connecting with my birth family, so my mother's family, and every family has a weird uncle historian, and I have one. And when I met him for the first time, he said, oh, your husband is Jewish, right? I said, yeah, he is. So he says, brilliant. Well, maybe he can show me what all of these documents are. And he brings this pile of ketubas and plonks them on my table. And I look, and I have just done my exam and everything like that. It was just, and I see all of these ketubas, and I cannot believe my eyes. And of course, I take them to Rabbi Wolf and tell him the story, and he's like, Rebekah, this is the most amazing story ever. You have to come to shul and tell everyone about it. And I said, well, now that I'm really Jewish, I'm never going back to shul. See me on a high holiday at my funeral. But in all seriousness, it's been wonderful.
Told you it was a goodie. How has reconnecting with your Jewish heritage shaped your sense of self, but also in terms of motherhood, like raising children in that heritage and taking that story forward?
Oh, it's been wonderful. It's been a beautiful, I mean, if anyone has done a conversion, they tell you, converts are Jewish souls returning. And honestly, I didn't really believe it. I thought it was just a thing to make me feel kind of welcome. But you believe it. You believe it. And particularly, for me, growing up without, in a white family, looking brown, in a Christian community where I didn't feel completely part of that community, it's been a really beautiful homecoming, and it's a place where I feel that I belong. So it's been magic.
Welcome.
Thank you.
It's great to have you. From one woman who doesn't look that Jewish either,
Yeah.
so it's pretty good. Shifting gears a little, Gabbi, there is something unspeakably cruel in getting up in front of an AJFN Fertility Awareness Shabbat with hope and grace, only to be plunged into unthinkable darkness days later. Can you take us to that moment when joy gave way to grief and a world you were ready to meet suddenly disappeared?
Yeah. First, is this working? It is working? Okay. No. Now? No? Yeah. Okay. Now? Yes. Yeah, I didn't want to cry, but I'm already, I think even just hearing her name makes me cry. But yes, I will always remember that fertility Shabbat. I was pregnant and had just let myself feel hopeful, actually, at 36, 37 weeks. I had told myself, okay, now it's happening. And we had made it past our IVF journey. We had made it past all of the quote-unquote scariest of the scans. And I had Lee alongside me the entire time, my AJFN mentor, because when I moved to Australia, I didn't know anyone else currently going through IVF. I had friends in America who had gone through it, and I knew the statistics that there must be people around me who were, but I didn't know them, or if I did know them, they already had their babies in their arms. And so I had first gotten connected with AJFN because I just was looking for a mentor or someone to sort of be alongside me during the IVF journey. And then Lee stuck with me. It wasn't just all of the IVF milestones. I got a text from her. It was every scan. And there were quite a lot, not because anything was wrong. It was actually a perfect pregnancy, but because we had a pedantic doctor, and we at least then knew we had been doing everything that we should. And I got myself, and we got us to the very end, and I finally had hope. I said to Ari, okay, now let's build the cot. Now I can, do my final chemist runs. I started my maternity leave and could start the nesting. It was finally happening, and the Jewish superstitions that I had sort of been pushing away, I had sort of decided, for myself, I have to start feeling excited, and now it's the end, so now it's okay. I can start buying things, and we can build the cot and whatnot. So I attended an infertility Shabbat and was in my third trimester at the time, and hopefully gave a lot of hope to others that they too could be on the journey, and there was no promises ever in terms of how the journey would end, but you could at least do it alongside somebody else, that there were plenty of others in the Jewish community, whether you knew them or not, who you could be connected with and do it alongside them. And I spoke about how my relationship with Lee had developed. not knowing much of her story at all, where we mostly talked about my medical, what was happening from a pregnancy standpoint and an emotional standpoint. And we were ready, and we had a baby shower, and like I said, started maternity leave. So I felt like I could get up at that point, and hopefully share with others that you could do it alongside AJFN, and there were others going through it too.
It's such an it's hard not to get teary. It's such an impossibly hard reality that the two of you experienced. How did you hold each other through that agony? I'd like to hear from both of you if possible.
Before we lost Stevie, I actually had no idea what a stillbirth was. I obviously knew the term and had sort of colloquially said, we'll induce at 39 weeks just to reduce any chance of stillbirth because it was an IVF baby and we're just going to be extra conservative, and didn't actually know what it was necessarily. And then when your world does fall apart and your literal dream, your nightmare, I'd say, from that had been creeping up in your dreams all along, does happen, you actually can't believe it. I think as humans, we're not meant to be able to process that type of grief. I don't think it's the right order of life events. Parents typically go before their children do. And so I don't think as parents you're meant to be able to process that type of loss. So Ari and I dealt with the grief very differently, and we are stronger for it, but I will say, thank God, before that we knew nothing about grief. And if there is anything that we can do as a legacy of Stevie around sharing the learnings of what we've learned about grief, because at some point everyone in this room will either be supporting someone else, whether it's fertility or in general types of grief. So we dealt with it quite differently, which I can let Ari speak more about.
Yeah, like this seems to be working. So Ari, the reason I'm wearing glasses because I've been suffering with vestibular migraine, so just to clear that up. Like the grief that sort of Gabbi and I are actually continuing to go through, even it's been 2.5 years, it's still ongoing, is very different. And one of the sort of the key learnings that we kind of picked up about 3 weeks after Stevie died was that men and women generally grieve differently. And it's now, we've kind of called it the Stevie graph, but if you can kind of imagine women generally, and it's not always the case, but generally grieve, they're low and they kind of progress over time and improve, like you're in the hole, you're crying, versus men are up and about, and then there's big crashes. And that's what happened with us. Gabbi was, for that first 6 weeks, was in bed, and I was up, organizing everything, and I've had my crashes later on, like even within the last 2 months, I had a day that replicated the day Stevie died. We set up like an anxiety depression kind of month for me. And so it's like, it comes out of nowhere. So the ongoing grief, it pops up like, I don't know, yesterday I saw 2 girls running who were 7 or 8 years old. And that's kind of the way I pictured me as a parent at that point. So like I pictured, my daughter or son being very sporty, and those sort of things trigger me. That made me think of Stevie. Only time I'm in the pool, is where I sort of like think of her, I guess then also the massive difference between Gabbi and I is afterwards I think Gabbi struggled to be around other children in that time. I didn't, because I think they didn't, like, those were their kids, but there's no right or wrong in this. But it's been seeing kids like learning to ride a bike or learning to swim, those are the triggers. And so that everyone has their own journey. And I think what's been most helpful is in the aftermath of Stevie dying, is like with AJFN having that support in that community. I'd known of sort of a friend of mine that had suffered a stillbirth a kind of 2 years before me, but didn't know anything about it. I reached out to him, and when we were talking about grief, he told me that, you know, he'd had a panic attack when he'd gone back to the golf course, because that's where he found out his son died. And that was kind of 2 or 3 months after the fact. And so that kind of had prepared me for the falls I was going to hit, which I have and will continue to, but that's kind of how Gabbi and I have sort of navigated this path.
I just want to just punctuate our conversation here and really pay tribute to you, Ari. And I say this honestly with not a condescending bone in my body, but I know how difficult it is for men to talk about any of these issues, particularly when it comes to issues of fertility and loss. And it is so important. We've been privileged to be in Melbourne on Sunday, and we also were lucky enough to have a man on the panel, and he gave so much succour to so many men in the audience who ordinarily wouldn't have that kind of support, and to hear it from you. So it means just so much that you're here tonight.
Thank
you. I really want to thank you for that. You did something remarkable. You swam 140 kilometres in Stevie's honour.
200.
200?
No.
What's going on with my stats? Okay, fine. 200, forgive me. And it was much more than a fundraiser. And as a father and a partner and a man who is expected to fix things and be stoic and hold a family together, what did it mean to move your pain through water, to provide comfort, financial support as well, ultimately, but what did it mean to provide, in doing that, comfort to other people who all had already experienced or were going to experience your level of devastation and loss?
Yeah, I think one thing, swimming's always been that solace for me. I've always swam my entire life, and through various things, it's always kind of the place I go. And so immediately after Stevie died, I kind of coined the idea. I've always wanted to see how far I could swim. And I kind of was like, I should pick a charity, and AJFN was there, and I was like, let's do it. So it wasn't much thought, but I guess the longer term of it was Gabbi and I benefited so much from resources, like finding the counsellor that we found, having the doctor that we have, and we were in the privileged financial position to do that, to go on a trip, just the two of us shortly thereafter with Gabbi's family, then by ourselves. And we wanted to ensure that people within the community and more broadly didn't have to, if they didn't have the financial means, or just anyway, they had the resources available to them that we had. Because what came out of, us is, 3 weeks in, Gabbi and I had tried a certain psychologist and it wasn't working, and our doctor said, you need to speak to this woman. And we spoke to her, and within 10 minutes, she was one that explained to us that we'd be grieving differently. Gabbi didn't think I was grieving at that point. And so through the swim, the main thing, besides the financial, the main thing I wanted was people to say Stevie's name and to know, because I was viewing it as this is all the swimming carnivals that she would never have to do. I was swimming I think my kids will be swimmers, but we'll see. But I'm swimming all this sort of distance that she would never got to. And so the main thing was, having friends with her name on the bum. I come to training and some friends were wearing them, and my brother still a couple of years later puts them on, and so it's just nice coming out of nowhere, seeing her name, and people asking about her. It's because our memory, we can really see this versus Remy now. People can say, how's he going and how's he growing? Stevie will always be that point in time, and the swim was something tangible they could talk about, and it kind of enabled people to support us in a way that when they might not feel comfortable, kind of open that conversation, and they could ask how the swim was. And even 2 years later, talking about it again has enabled us to talk about a growing child, even though she's not going to be growing. So it's enabled that kind of memory to continue on and actually to live. So that's kind of been the driving force, and we just wanted to ensure that people had those resources that we had as well.
I'm so touched that you said that. I had the privilege of interviewing a gentleman who tragically lost 2 children, and he wrote a book, and his book was called Find the Words. And I was forever schooled after that, because I think so many of us, when people go through untold grief, people vanish, they fumble, they don't find the words. And his position was, which, as I said, has educated me for the rest of my life, is that people want to talk about who they lost. That was a person, that was somebody you loved, that was someone that you breathed life into. And to rob someone who is in grief of talking about that beautiful being is an additional anguish that you are imposing on that family or on that individual. So I wanted to ask you, both of you, how should people show up for someone who has lost a child at any stage?
We have a few learnings that we've even put down on paper, just because I think I really do give people the benefit of the doubt. I think when someone is going through grief, this could be the loss of a parent, it could be fertility-related grief, it doesn't matter. I think that the principles are the same. And a lot of what I learned was it's very uncomfortable for us, especially as adults, to sit in the uncomfortableness. There's a more inappropriate word I usually use, but you know, if someone is sitting in a hole, the best thing you can do for them is to get in the hole with them rather than pulling them out. And I think we try so hard to pull them out, and we placate them and we say, it's gonna be okay, you'll have another child, I know you will, or you know, this will pass, or you know, and it might make the person saying it feel better that they're doing something. And I genuinely believe people want to help, and it's so hard to find the words, but I think the best thing is, and this is words and actions, is being in that hole with them. Like, you know, just bringing a cup of coffee and just letting them cry, or giving them the distraction that they might need, or asking about their loved one. And I think sometimes even if you ask questions back to that person of like, what can I do for you? It's so burdensome in the moment to even think about it, that the people who you end up letting into your inner circle are those who just do it. They just show up, it might be right, it might be wrong, but you just sort of, you do something, and it's to try to meet them where they're at, and to not sort of dismiss that it's happened, even though it's very uncomfortable to sit in the shit and to be there in that situation. You have to meet them where they are.
Today you hold your magnificent Remy, your miracle, your rainbow baby in your arms. But Stevie is still here, always. How do you hold both elation and heartache in the same vessel?
I don't always know that we do a good job of it. I would definitely say I'm part broken, and I'll always be broken, but that's the new me. It's just, there's always gonna be a piece of me missing. There's always gonna be celebrations that will always be a little tainted. There's always gonna be our daughter missing, and so it's just become the new version of us, is always a little bit sad, always feeling like she's missing, and trying very hard not to have that be a reflection on Remy. And thank God we have him. The only place I wanted to be at the time was, to be honest, in a hole with Stevie, just to be close to her. And so if I couldn't get another baby in my arms, I don't even want to go there. So I think the fact that like we actually had embryos waiting was the biggest miracle, that they could actually be from the same batch, that we were successful in it, and that we could have him. But it is in no way ever a replacement. We're always partly broken and always parents to both of them.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I kind of view it a little bit differently. I always use like Stevie's kind of with me, and she's kind of with me when Remy's not. So like my time swimming or running is my time with her. So like, butterfly, or purple butterflies to be exact, are like the symbol for stillbirth, and Gabby and I have kind of taken that and expanded a little bit to be all butterflies. And, like on runs, like down on the Maroubra beach, there was at one point like a butterfly accompanied me in one direction, and that same butterfly was waiting for me on 4 or 5 Ks later in the same spot. Came back and I was like, oh, Stevie said hello. And as we're leaving the house, I'll go into a swim and I'll say, I'm taking Stevie, you keep Remy. So we we kind of keep her memory alive as much as we can. Whilst she's not physically there, it's, we try to make her I always said, it's died. No. So since Remy was born, every time he goes to sleep, I say, oh, you're going to go bike riding with Stevie in his dreams. So once he gets a little bit older, maybe he'll actually be able to understand what I'm saying. But that's kind of just trying to bring her into our day-to-day without making sure Remy's never burdened by her sister.
This is now to all of you. Each of you have lived through a heartbreak that didn't just interrupt your lives, it rewrote your lives. And tonight you brought that truth here not to be witnessed, but to be felt. We know that tragedy or trauma redraws intimacy. And so for some people it strengthens their intimacy, for other people it falls by the wayside. When your life became clinical, procedural and emotionally thin, how did you hold on to the us? How did you hold on to the relationship when things felt so challenging and fraught?
Through a lot of therapy is one answer. I think being really honest. I think, for example, that advice we received 3 weeks after Stevie died, that men and women grieve differently, has enabled us to breathe. It enabled, because Gabby was there worrying oh, you're out doing things, you're not grieving, and that was my version of grieving. But I think we've enabled it. We have our ups and downs like every couple, no matter what, and just the way we approach things is different. But I think we always come back together is through communication, and just learning from each other's way we do things, listening. Eventually you get to the right outcome, and kind of holding that and making sure. After Stevie died, eventually we just went away to Fraser Island for a week and did nothing. And that sort of time allowed us kind of to reconnect. And that's why, on Stevie Swim, we think it's so important that, people, if they don't necessarily have the financial resources, that they can access, a holiday for a few days to get away from everything. Especially if they have, Stevie was our first, but if you've had 2 kids before that and you've got to care for children, how are you going to get that time back to yourselves? Because as we've learned to parents of a live child now, that disappears a lot. And it becomes more difficult. So we had the advantage of Stevie being our first, because in that aspect, we didn't have a child to hold, but we at least could really focus on ourselves at that point. And so I think it's really pertinent that couples have that ability, regardless of financial situation, where AJFN comes in, to be able to access counsellors when they need it, trips when they need it, and to get that time away, just the 2 of them.
Rebekah and then Gabby and Ari, please weigh in. Was there ever a point in your journey where you just felt there was no more that you could give? It was asking too much of you.
Yeah, many times. I think that the mental aspect was quite overwhelming for me. I mean, physically, I had lots of drugs and a lot of help, but over such a long period of time and so many surgeries, failed surgeries and going back, and many times I found myself at the precipice of a dark place. So most certainly.
Gabbi and Ari?
Definitely. After, Stevie died, I got made redundant 6 weeks later. So you throw in on that, it's 12 months of not being able to work post that, there's some spanners that are thrown in, but, we, luckily, Gabbi got pregnant with Remy sort of 4 months in, and, we have such an amazing kind of family and friends and community network that kind of enable you to kind of push on even when things are, proverbially, using the word Gabbi did before, unpleasant. Definitely there's just times that you're like, can't really push on, but you find a way, and now, with our future children, and now that with Remy, that's like, our reason to exist today. Hopefully everyone that wants that as part of their lives can have that pleasure and have that sort of, happiness that children bring.
Yeah, I'd say the only thing that got me out of bed, and it is the theme of tonight, is hope, is just needing a living baby in my arms. That was it. I mean, it was the reason I got out of bed and started trying to work out again. I was like, my body has to get strong to do this all over again. And 3 months later, I got, luckily the IVF worked, but I mean, I had to I chose to, and I was lucky enough to have 2 full-term back-to-back pregnancies. And so I was like, I have to get my body strong to do it again. I have to be able to eat again in order to be able to keep a child alive in me. We were so ready. I mean, we had to rip the car seat out of the car when we came home from the hospital that night after finding out. So you're so ready that the only thing that would get me out of bed was just that hope that I could hold. I mean, it was a privilege to be able to hold and meet Stevie, and for our immediate family to meet her. But when you give birth for the first time and there's no crying there's no cry from the baby. Everyone else in the room was crying, but you give birth and then you leave the hospital empty-handed. You have to hold on to that hope that there has to be a different ending, and a baby that's crying in that operating room, and that was the best sound I've ever heard in my life. So that was the only thing that kept me going.
Just one final question for each of you, not one that looks back, but that asks you to reach inward. If you could go back to that earlier version of you, the one that still believed in normal outcomes and storybook endings, what kind of solace or comfort would you offer? What tenderness, what kind of knowing?
I can kick off. I would just say, I think, that people show up for you in ways that you would never imagine, and people from different walks of life, different parts of your life that you maybe haven't heard from in a long time, show up, send you an Uber gift card, you haven't spoken to them for a few years, they've had grief that you never knew about. And so the world, whilst it's bad, there's also good in it. And so that is, I guess, telling myself is make sure you embrace all the support you get, and you can, which allows you to try and see the hope in the world that still exists despite the darkness.
Yeah, I'd say when you hit rock bottom, it does make you a better version of yourself. And Ari and I always say we would rather be worse off versions of ourselves and not have lost Stevie, but it did make us better people, hopefully better at supporting others in grief and around fertility in particular. And so, again, we'd rather not have to have been strong or become better people from it, but that is sort of just an unintended consequence of what happens. But as Ari said, people really do show up for you in the worst of times, in the most unexpected ways. And I met this, secret society that I never wanted to be a part of or wanted to never know it existed, but it does, and it does exist in Sydney, and you meet others through it. So it's been a positive.
I think I'd say to myself, don't worry about the fairy tale ending, because you'll get there eventually. And it may not be the path that you thought you might have. I mean, I could never have dreamt up something so crazy in my whole life, but it's going to be okay in the end, and it has been okay.
And that's a beautiful note to end on. Rebekah, Gabbi and Ari, thank you for entrusting us with your stories, because they will forever remain in our hearts. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please put your hands together for the amazing